We now move on to item H. Review, discussion, and possible action to rescind the motion adopted at the August 6, 2019 Legislative Committee meeting relating to staff study and preparation of regulatory language to permit the C46 solar contractor classification to install battery energy storage systems, ESS, on specified residential units with restrictions. This is going to be a long script, so bear with us. This brings us to the issue of energy storage systems. There is no content in the packet for this agenda item or the next agenda item. For background, at the direction of the board, staff has been researching the appropriate classification to install a battery energy storage system since early 2018. In March 2019, staff published for the board an 81-page ESS report and distributed and received hours of public testimony on the proper classification to install ESS. It should be emphasized that staff has done a lot of work on this subject, from research to studies to reports to conducting interviews and holding informal hearings and industry meetings. Staff has done a bang-up job. They've done all the research. They've had the hearings. They've done an awesome job, and thank you to staff for all of your efforts and legal expertise. In addition to the hundreds of written letters staff received and reviewed, CSLB heard and received over 300 incidents of individual testimony provided from either side of the C46 or C10 industry in a variety of public forums since early 2018. At the back of the room, staff has provided a timeline detailing at least half a dozen industry meetings held on the matter, half of which were joint meetings, and like I said, it's the back of the table. Staff has worked very closely with both sides of this issue to ensure we get the right response. As you know, at the August 6th meeting of this committee, we heard hours of testimony from over 80 people, including testimony from invited experts on all sides of the issue. On the topic of proper classification to install energy storage systems, this committee passed out the following motion. But before that, once again, staff has worked very diligently to try and resolve this and help us come down with the decision. The C10s had an expert, C46 has provided an expert, and the building officials provided an expert, and we took that testimony down as well. Keep in mind, all of this testimony has been recorded electronically. The committee passed the following motion on that date of August 6. The motion was recommend directing staff to prepare regulatory language to permit C46 solar contractor classification to install battery energy storage systems, ESS, on specified residential units with restrictions, with the further recommendation that staff study ESS size, complexity, voltage, and risk, and bring that information back to this committee. After the August 6th meeting, staff held subsequent meetings with industry, and alongside staff, I myself personally met with the Department of Consumer Affairs Executive Office and their legal counsel, who provided their insights and recommendations. Following these meetings and discussion with our own counsel, we've given this issue further consideration. We are now recommending that the committee consider recommending to the full board that the staff hire 1 or 2 consultants to review this issue. We are making this recommendation because after numerous public meetings that afforded the opportunity for more than 300 people to testify, it is evident to us that the CSLB should conduct further study on this issue. With regard to economic issues, both industries have submitted economic impact reports that are available at the back table, or if additional copies are needed upon request, we can make that happen. The solar industry report states that the economic impact on restricting C46 classification from installing commercial battery systems may be $90 million or more. The economic impact report received from the electrical industry indicates there will be no economic impact. With regard to numerous public safety issues, numerous solar industry representatives have testified that the battery installation is routine and does not pose a safety threat. On the other hand, the electrical industry representatives have testified battery installation requires electrical knowledge and that the electrician certification training requirement is vital to protecting public safety. We've heard you. We've heard both sides of you. As much as we appreciate staff study and efforts to achieve a resolution to this matter over the months, we believe that an outside consultant will be helpful in reviewing all the information received and/or any need for possible additional information in a report that will result in an independent analysis before board consideration of these issues. This is in order to allow the board to make a sound and fair decision. We believe it's the best course of action that an independent third party or parties research the issue and come back with the recommendation for board consideration. Independent, neutral, third party. As a reminder, Government Code Section 11349 requires the record of any potential rulemaking by an agency to demonstrate by substantial evidence the need for any proposed changes to regulations. This would include any proposed changes to existing C-46 contractor classification or any other classifications. According to this legal standard, evidence includes, but is not limited to, facts, studies, and expert opinion. If this committee recommends to the full board the hiring of an independent expert or consultant and the associated expense of doing so, the board will need to provide final approval. Based on the foregoing, we are recommending that the legislative committee action from August 6, 2019 not go forward to the CSLB, so that the CSLB may further study this issue. And two new motions be made. One, to rescind the original motion. And the second, to secure approval to seek a qualified expert or experts to assist the CSLB in its study of issues and information received on battery energy storage system installation. With that, I think I've been pretty clear, but I'm sure there are people that are not clear. So we're going to ask the public for any comments on what I just said. Are there any public comments on what was just said? Board, behind the dais, is there any comments on what was just said?
Oops, sorry.
Counselor? No? Chief? David, you want to say something?
Yeah, it seems how it was my motion, I believe, in August. I know we've been discussing this thing, seems like almost since I've been on the board, and which has been like 8 or 9, 10 years, whatever it is now. I want to make sure that if we're going to do this, and the expert or experts, well, one thing you said in there was expert opinion. I don't want any opinion, I want facts. Honestly, an opinion to me isn't a fact. In fact, I have a shirt that says that. Anyhow, I want to make sure that they, I wrote a bunch of stuff down here. We're going to prepare a report for the risk, size, type, and occupancy of a ESS storage system or energy storage system. That is not, to see if it's no longer incidental to a PV system, and it could be outside the scope of a C-46 license or whatever. And a lot of this stuff clicked in my head even more so when my neighbor just recently had a PV system installed on his house by PG&E, and I asked the guys why they're wearing 3 different shirts, and they go, because we're all independent contractors that we all work for this 3 different companies. And then I go, well, you guys certified electricians? No, but they tied into the panel. So we got to look into this stuff and really make sure what's going on. I get home from, like I said, I get home from work and I see this going on in the neighbor's house, and there's a lot more issues just besides that. I think, again, I want the report to have evidence supporting all the thresholds or whatever we want to put on it, based on technology and supporting documents, maybe established by national and state standards. I also sit on a bunch of code committees through the state of California and national code committees, so I know how important that is for national and state standards and codes. Do an economic impact. This is just notes, impact analysis, notes I wrote down based on, or for thresholds based on verifiable information, not speculation. To direct staff to identify and retain outside expert, that's what we're talking about here. To prepare a report, threshold and regulation, I can't even read my own writing sometimes. And to threshold and regulations, and then bring it back to the committee or to the board for board consideration. I mean, basically what I'm really wanting, I mean, I know that there's issues on both sides, and we have, I guess, these papers on both sides, but they came today or whatever, we didn't have time to read them. But again, I don't want hearsay or anything, opinion. I want facts and data to support all this, and that's what we really need, not, like I said, hearsay. I was at PG&E, I don't know, about 4 months ago, and they were talking about training, and this was on the HVAC side, which that's my field of expertise. And the guy at PG&E says, well, if you have a contractor license, that means you're trained. And I go, well, I used to work for a company that had 1,500 employees with a sole owner. He's the one who took the test for the contractor's license. It didn't say anything about training any individuals. So training is huge. I know C10 contractors have to have certified electricians, which I believe in, because there's a lot of issues with contractors' licenses. I mean, not contractors, like with electricians or non-electricians hooking up a lot of different things. So, you know, I just want to see the facts and everything lined up and make sure that, I know staff has always done a great job with this stuff, and I guess now that we want to do something else with staff to make sure, I don't even know if this is actually a legislative issue or a licensing issue, whatever it is, to make sure that it's done and laid out, and then hopefully we'll be done with this. So.
Thank you. Anything else from the board? Yep.
Yeah, I think this is probably the right way to go. I mean, there's been a lot of confusion, even on the motion. You know, I mean, when we talked about it at the meeting and prior to voting, I expressed some concern about just the residential, limiting it to residential. Like, that should be part of the study so that we understand whether it's occupancy, maybe that's a better threshold versus residential, what have you. And we've heard all the arguments on both sides, and they're all arguments. It really, I think Dave's right. We need to get down to that substantial evidence. The likelihood of this thing going to litigation, whatever is done, is, I think, pretty high. And so we better have facts, not hyperbole, you know, documented instances or issues that is a harm that we're actually trying to solve for the consumer. And whatever that looks like, whatever those thresholds are, that we have that evidentiary support. And I think staff, as much of a great job and as laudable as they've been, it's just such a thorny issue that we need that independent, almost like an arbiter, to cut through, figure out what the facts are, present those facts to the board, for the board to make a good decision. So I agree with what Dave said. I agree with Augie, and when the appropriate times come, I'd be happy to make that motion.
Anything else from the side of the dais?
Yeah, can we have, maybe if we do this, to have maybe 2 board members work with the staff? And when it all comes up?
So this motion is just, this article, this part of it
We haven't made any motion.
is just about rescinding the motion. So on the next one, if it is rescinded, the next one is to discuss directing staff. That would be appropriate to mention at that point.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Public comments closed, but I'll open it up again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you want comments on the second motion right now of
No,
selecting the consultant?
no, let's
Thank you.
wait till we get to the second one. Yeah. So once again, since I opened it up again, public, if you have anything on rescinding the motion, that's what this is about. Okay. The chair would entertain a motion to rescind the motion adopted on August 6, 2019 Legislative Committee meeting relating to staff study and preparation of regulatory language to permit the C46 solar contractor classification to install battery energy storage systems on specified residential units with restrictions.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second, I guess.
I have a motion and a second to the public. Any questions? Board committee, questions? Felice, please.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese. David De La Torre,
Nay.
Dave Diaz.
Aye, I guess.
Motion passes.
All right. Second part of this. Agenda item I. Review, discussion, and possible action to direct staff to identify and retain an outside consultant or expert to study energy storage systems, ESS, information received, and ESS installation issues, including safety concerns and appropriate contractor classifications to install ESS. As we previously explained in the last agenda item, there's a need to refer the study of this issue to a qualified expert to ensure that CSLB meets its mandate in ensuring public protection. Its mission of regulating the construction industry through policies that promote health, safety, and general welfare of the public in matters relating to construction, and that it complies with the law by supporting it with substantial evidence. The need for any proposed changes to regulations. That said, we already beat the horse in the last agenda item. Anybody have any comments? Now would be appropriate for your comment.
Oh, taking public?
Whatever the motion is, I want to make sure it includes risk, size, type, occupancy related to the ESS systems. And with all, like I said, basically the supporting documents, national codes and standards, national state codes and standards, excuse me, have some kind of threshold limits if that's necessary, but to at least look into that. And the economic impact analysis. Anyhow, that's what I got right now, so.
Any other board members have any specific comment to this issue? David? No? Counselor? Anything you want to say? This will be 5.
Well, I just want to make sure that the members understand that contracting process. We would send this matter out to bid if you authorize it, and the expert will determine how they want to conduct the study, but you will have a scope of work things that you want them to answer, and that will be included, and the staff will work with the Department of Consumer Affairs Contracts Unit and the Department of General Services to secure an expert who will study the issue. So I just want to make sure that that's
So to clarify, this fully formed motion will go to the big board,
correct.
and then the big board will be, at that time, will be made appraised of what you just said, because they're the ones who are actually going to make the motion to hire or to concur.
Right,
With this
to
fully
approve
formed
the
motion.
motion from the committee, if there is an approved motion.
Right. So if there are any board members out there, keep that in the back of your minds. So, public. I'll come back to you. Somebody killed me. Now, let's keep in mind that what we're going to speak to is not how great C10s are and how great C46s are, exploding batteries and all that nonsense. We're going to speak specifically to what you want in the record and as far as if this motion is even made, because it hasn't been made yet. So, Mr. Bernanke.
Cut myself off here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eddie Bernanke on behalf of the National Electrical Contractors Association. Again, I know this body has put in a lot of time into this issue, and we truly appreciate that. From the get-go, back in 2015 when we started this, it's been our opinion that the C46 license classification in its pure reading is not eligible to do this type of work, this battery energy storage work, under the way that their license definition is structured today. It's been determined by the board that they do this performance work under license under the incidental and supplemental provisions of the license law. I think in a recent opinion by the board to the city of Santa Clarita, it's been clarified that this is being performed by the C46s under the incidental and supplemental. So we would want to be sure that while we support the board, dotting their I's and crossing their T's and looking at this, that it's, kind of focused in on at what point is this work become no longer incidental and supplemental. The size, the scope, the energy output or storage of these, or ability to store of these systems, at what point is that no longer incidental, supplemental, and becoming its own system? And so we think that's a big component and an important component of whatever study or comments that come back to the full board, and would hope that that would be part of the consultant's duties, is to have them look at what point do these systems no longer become incidental and supplemental. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Scott Wetcher on behalf of the California Coalition of Utility Employees and the State Association of Electrical Workers. First of all, I'd like to thank the staff and the board members and council for the patience and diligence and thoroughness in which you've conducted this entire process. And I'm so glad that you provided for the record today chronology of exactly how much work you all have put into this. Having said that, we have no problem supporting the idea of having a contracted individual expert do a study. I think that it's very important that they stay within the guideposts that Mr. Bernanke just outlined about exactly what the issue is relative to existing licensing law and that issue of supplemental and incidental. And secondly, I think that it's important that the scope be very clearly defined by this committee as to exactly what the expert's going to be looking at. And when it comes to the issue of economic analysis, where this is very common in other state agencies and within DCA, where you do an economic analysis of an impact of a particular regulation, but that needs to be based on verifiable governmental databases, not stuff that's pulled out of industry supplied information. I mean, it's got to be real verifiable data. Preferably, there's multiple databases within the state government that can provide that data. And so that's what we would ensure, that you need to be precise in the scope so that the public is aware, as well as the consultant, as to what exactly is going into this study. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Mr. Chairman, Richard Markison, today on behalf of the Plumbing, Heating, Cooling Contractors of California, the California chapters of the American Fire Sprinkler Association, and the Independent Roofing Contractors of California. The board recently took action to increase fees because of potential deficit in the board's budget. And so on behalf of the contractors that I represent that don't have a dog in this fight, I would say that there's going to be frustration and concern in as much as you've already spent 2 years of staff time that has not been calculated, but 2 years of staff time is a considerable investment. And now talking about hiring a consultant to come up with another report, essentially to justify some future action that the board may take. There will be frustration among the other license classifications, I think, when it becomes apparent that the board is spending who knows how much on an outside consultant to study this issue, particularly in light of the recent fee increases in the proposals to raise the statutory cap. So we would urge caution and certainly have an estimate for how much the consultant is going to cost, or possibly put a not to exceed cap on the proposal.
Thank you. Next.
Good morning, Brad Hebner with California Solar and Storage Association, CALSA. I was the primary author of the cost impact analysis that has been distributed here today under CALSA's name. With input from a lot of people, I reached out to a lot of contractors to get their input and thoughts on what the real impacts would be. Some of them thought what I put on paper was too low. I honestly tried to be middle ground on this. And yeah, as you see, it came up with an impact of $13 million in year one alone if you limit it to medium and large commercial only. And that is over $300 million between now and 2030. So those are real impacts. In my view, you don't need to spend a lot of money running likely to six figures on an independent consultant to tell you that there will be cost impacts. I think that the committee could hear a recommendation that there are zero cost impacts and find that not to be realistic without hiring an independent expert. With that said, we certainly would support further careful consideration of this. We're not at all opposed to the hiring of an independent expert. We pledged to work together collaboratively with that expert if you choose to go down that pathway. And I would just encourage you to do your best to find somebody who doesn't have preconceived opinions coming in. You want a person who doesn't have this thing all thought through in their minds coming in, but they can take evidence and trust a good researcher to find the best evidence from whatever sources he or she can find them to use their best judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Bernadette Del Chiara, Executive Director of the California Solar and Storage Association. I appreciate and we want to be on the record of supporting the previous motion to rescind the August 6th decision, and we appreciate that. We also appreciate all the work the staff has put into this issue. We've been here since that February 23rd, 2018 initial meeting, and a lot of work has gone in to this. And over that period of time, not a single incident of harm or problem has been brought to your attention, despite the fact that the C46 licensed contractors have been installing hundreds and hundreds of solar and storage systems during that period of time. I want to just remind the board that the events of the past 3 weeks alone should give you enough pause to just put this issue to rest and not spend any more tax dollars on studying the issue. We've got elderly citizens needing energy, electricity, reliable supplies of electricity for their homes. We've got people with medical needs fully dependent on a reliable supply of electricity. The events of the past few weeks make this whole restriction of trade, increasing the cost of the one solution that is going to be able to come to the rescue for California consumers. It needs to just be taken off the table completely. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Thank you for your time. My name is Julius Cherry. I'm the retired fire chief from the city of Sacramento, where I worked for more than 30 years. And in that capacity, I was a long-term member, even in post-retirement, of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, as well as NFPA. I'd like to associate myself with the comments that Commissioner Diaz made when he said training is huge, because that's absolutely true. Energy storage systems improperly installed do have a serious risk of fire, electrical shock, flash burns, explosions, and exposure to hazardous materials. Well, first of all, I should say at the onset, we support the motion to have an independent consultant come in and study the issue. And in that vein, I think a very serious focus on NFPA 855 that is really the Bible, so to speak, on energy storage systems. As I understand it, at some previous hearing, someone who purported to be a member of the fire service got up and said that as long as the system had a UL approval, that it was safe, regardless of whether or not it was improperly stored or improperly maintained. With all due respect to whoever said that, it's nonsense. Just because something has a underwriter's lab approval doesn't mean if the product is misused, improperly installed, or improperly maintained, that it doesn't pose the risk that I talked about a few minutes ago. I think the idea that the committee would consider a size threshold for energy storage system above which it is not treated as simply supplemental to PVC is where ultimately this should end up. And again, we support the motion and strongly urge whoever you end up hiring to focus and bring you back information on the validity of NFPA 855. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Tom Enslow, attorney for the IBW NECA LMCC. Just a couple points in what's being proposed. First of all, if there's a study that goes forward, any economic analysis really needs to be based on what the existing regulatory baseline is, which is currently, and the existing, how this actually works, right now in the world. The existing baseline is that C46 contractors are authorized to do PV installations. It's silent. The regulation is silent as to energy storage system. Is a dispute that we guys are trying to resolve as to whether or not energy storage systems can be incidental and supplemental work. And what the full board has asked is there a threshold at one point where, we need to, this should not fall into the C46 this should not fall into the C46 license. And this is based, largely on the fact that the larger these energy storage systems are, the more dangerous they are. And when we do this report, I urge that we don't reinvent the wheel. We look at the industry standards and codes that are out there, and they all uniformly set size thresholds above which they require installers and permitting to take extra precautions because these become more dangerous. And this is, what should be looked at here is, if there's thresholds, what should be asked is that what are the potential thresholds? And that should be brought to the board by the expert, and the experts say these are the thresholds you could use based on this evidence, and it's up to the board to decide which ones they should choose. But the board needs to know what are the thresholds that are already being used out there as far as size, where we take extra precaution, and then determine whether any of that makes sense if they want to take the existing regulations and clarify what is incidental and supplemental work and what's not. The other point I'd like to quickly make is just the economic analysis baseline, and also has to be based on the fact that right now not every energy storage system is being installed by C46 contractor. The larger ones are generally being installed by C10 contractors. 40% of C46 contractors already have C10 contractor license, so they won't be affected by this. So you're only talking a few hundred contractors that would actually even be affected by this regulation. The most of the industry right now that are doing larger systems have C10 licenses. And so they, already would meet this requirement. They already have that extra level of precaution to make sure that when they do energy storage, they do it right. And they're also allowed to do it independently as well. So they have that expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Bringing it back to the board. Oh, all right.
In the name of economic reporting on this, I'd be very curious to see another side, if it can be afforded and if it could be, the time could be felled, about the economic impact of the ongoing indecision that we've had. Because someone used the phrase earlier, beating a dead horse on this issue, and it's been going on for a number of years. And the fallout that I've seen from that, as someone who works in the solar industry, someone who also works in the electrical contracting industry, is that it's kind of giving solar energy storage and kind of the new age of electrical contracting, as I call it, as we continue to push towards renewables, a black eye. Because I've been seeing the numerous articles about this internal struggle that's going on in our community. I've been seeing ongoing things where people are saying, well, I want to pick the right people. The mention about having 3 different people in different shirts, each doing a different part, certainly isn't a good look. So I'd be curious to see in that economic impact what the damage has been for not, moving forward with that, and what will go on if we don't actually come to a decision soon. And on that note, I like to look at facts as well. And the one thing I've, just factually speaking, there are over 33,000 C10 contractors. I've made this point before, I think in San Diego about a year ago. And there are about 900 or so C46 contractors, about over 40% of which also have a C10. So the number of contractors we're actually speaking about here, putting a regulation on, is about 500. So I just want that to sink in for a second. And finally, I did an independent report that I didn't release, but I was commissioned by NEC and IBW to do this, that looked at both C46 contractors and C10 contractors to see code violations and issues. And big surprise, both have code violations. I have on my laptop right now a report that has the screenshots, the photocopies of C46 contractors who operated, who did installs and had fires, who had explosions. And there was one in Marietta, California, they didn't even pull a permit, a solar C46 contractor, went to dig, which was something that we were talking about earlier in this meeting, went to dig to do the grounding and actually hit a line and it exploded and killed someone. So, I mean, there are real issues here. And on the same side, C10 contractors had various code things as well. It just comes with the territory. There's always going to be people who don't do this stuff well. So I'd like to see the economic development. I'd like to make sure this is resolved soon. And yes, safety is the number one priority in this, because not only do we want people to be doing this safe, we want things to not be burning down, but we want to continue moving towards global warming abatement. And that's very important that we get this figured out and we get it figured out properly. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ed Murray. I'm with Aztec Solar, a couple of exits up the road in Rancho Cordova, and I'm also the president of the California Solar and Storage Association. Just to rebut what was just said, the contractor Marietta was a B contractor, not a C46 contractor. I want everybody to know that. So it wasn't a C46. I've been a C46 since 1980, and we've been installing storage. We have a container of storage systems in our warehouse right now because of all the fires that we have out there, and we're installing them safely every day. I'm also a B contractor, but I can tell you that there's not an issue with safety, and I appreciate the board for putting out this. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, coming back to the board. So,
Yeah, well,
go ahead, David.
I just want to make sure, when we do, I know you want to make a motion or have somebody make a motion or whatever it is.
Nope, we can talk about this as long as we have to.
No,
It's
I'm not talking about that.
important
I want
for
to
everybody to get their point
I-
across.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, I'd like to see a couple board members, I don't even care who it is, that, or committee members that are on this, because I want to make sure that the scope of whatever we do with the outside consultant, make sure that we add all this stuff in, or the way staff will direct it, or whatever it is, so.
If I may,
Okay.
if you may.
I would recommend that the board members and committee members stay separate from the expert selection process. I would highly recommend that we move forward with the staff working with the control agencies to develop this information. They may need to consult with other experts on scope, but in order to make sure that when you make a decision, that we have what I consider an independent report, fully independent report, and there is no perception of any kind of influence or bias to the expert, I would recommend that it just be left to the expert to determine what information they need to meet the scope of work that the staff work with the control agencies to develop. That's typically how we select experts. We usually don't have the board members involved in that process.
No, I wasn't talking about board members being being in the process of selecting the outside consultant. I was talking just about the scope of where you want it to go.
Well, I think staff has taken pretty good notes today.
Okay?
They've
But
noted.
is it going to be in the motion, though?
No. They've noted concerns. They've noted the public's concerns. And when they come to the big board, if this motion were to go through and pass, Counselor's exactly right. That's why staff is here, to support us by taking notes and listening to us, listening to the public. And when we put out the RFP, when staff puts out the RFP for the consultant, whoever that person may be, or persons, they will note our concerns, the public concerns, and I am sure that this consultant will take all the evidence that's been provided from today going back to the beginning of time, And I'm sure the way consultants work, they're also going to take new testimony. So, but that's not, I mean, that's why we're getting that person, so we have an arm's length from this very emotional journey, and that we can make a fair and impartial decision. Yes, Kevin?
Yeah, no, I agree that we should move forward with an independent. I share the frustration, I think, that I'm hearing from the public. We've been talking about this since 2015 or so. The amount of time that we've spent on this issue has been inordinate compared to everything else that we've dealt with. There's three branches of government. You got the legislative, you got the executive, you got the judiciary. We're talking about statutes, interpreting statutes. I think we've provided our interpretation of what the C-46 regulation is. You know, that's, if we're wrong, that's through the judiciary. You know, if this is a political question, that's more for the legislature. We are not a political body. We're an executive body. And what we need is we need evidence showing the harm that we're going to fix by enacting this regulation. Either, and that may be existing harm or that may be prospective harm, you know, that whatever that is. And so I think, you know, we need to move with some dispatch on this, get it right, and either put it to bed or take action sooner rather than later. And what I would suggest as part of the motion is that at the next board meeting, staff come up with what the statement of work looks like. You know, what are...
Which board meeting? The big one or the little one?
The big one.
Okay.
With the
It takes a really long time to work through the process, and we don't have control over that. A lot of it has to do with working with the Department of General Services, and so I would suggest that we allow staff to do that work and provide that information. If you want to provide input on the scope of work,
Right.
that's fine. But as far as the board approving the scope of work, I would be concerned about that because it still has to go through the other control agencies to be approved. And
All right.
and I don't know that we want to hold it back.
Fair enough.
that would be
I guess
concerned.
the point is if there could be some sort of guidance perhaps that's brought back with, you know, with the motion or the recommendation to the board, you know, these are
Just
the.
general areas that have
Just
been
general
raised
areas,
over the
you know,
course of the
evidence
meetings.
of harm, you know, is it current harm,
Safety
is it prospective?
issues,
You know, what are,
economic.
exactly, and in
Sure.
a real factual, objective manner, and then we put a timeline on it, just so that we do get the certainty that the C-46 and the C-10 deserve, that our consumers deserve, that all of our people deserve.
David? You want something else to say?
I'm just, so the board can't, and no board member should comment or say anything about the scope of what this should be? Is that what you're saying?
That we already have. So just in this meeting
Okay.
alone, they've noted, everyone who's spoken, they've noted their concerns. I see their pens busily, mightily writing here. So it's also, the public record is also public, it's on camera. So they're gonna review what's been said today to make sure that everything that's been said is incorporated. And the registrar, through his department, working with legal, is going to put out an RFP, I'm assuming, and they're gonna know what they need. They know the parameters that they need to find out, to give us what we need to make an appropriate decision. So based on what they've heard today, heard in the past, David being the registrar, they know what we need in order to make a good decision. And they will impart that to whoever they hire.
Yeah, I get it. I understand, but also the original motion that happened in August was mine, and I thought it was all a done deal that we were going to go forward on it, so things do change, so that's all I'm saying.
That's true.
So,
Okay. Duly noted. So at this time, the chair would accept a motion to send to the big board to retain an outside consultant or experts or consultants to consider energy storage system information received, perform additional fact-finding as necessary, and provide analysis regarding ESS installation issues, including timely concerns, and the appropriate contractor license classification or classifications to install the battery energy systems. And I think I heard something about a timeline. Can you guys do that at the next meeting, David?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Chair would accept that motion.
So moved.
Chair has a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Public, do you have any questions on the motion?
Mr. Chairman, board members, Eddie Bernacchi on behalf of NECA. Just one point of clarification. The staff is going to bring a scope, out of this motion, a scope for retaining a consultant, and within that direction of retaining the consultant, there will be a scope of what they're to look at. Is that what we're hearing?
We're not going to have the scope of work. We're not going to have that done by December. It has to go through many channels before it's approved. What we're going to have are the concepts or issues that have been raised by various stakeholders that have been brought up during the course of all these meetings that we're going to be generally disclosing to the board. So those are the areas that the expert would be studying, but we're not going to have the actual scope of work
Okay, hold
done
on.
by the
Christie,
December
hold on.
meeting. Yes.
David, Registrar, could you answer the questions going forward?
Yes, what the plan would be is to bring back to the board at the December 12th meeting the general areas that we would be looking to put out to bid, and also the timeline that will generally, what it will generally take to accomplish the study, and also the regulatory process should the board want to go that direction.
Okay. Can I add on to my comment? Then the current position of the board is that the C46 licensee can perform this work when installing, at the same time they're installing a photovoltaic system.
So
Correct.
that is not pertinent to the motion.
Well, it's more a public comment just in general. Will the board be providing broad declaration to some of the comments today that there's confusion in the industry? So would like an industry bulletin be issued? Or could that happen?
That could be on a future agenda item.
Well, hold on, because what I will do at the end of the at the end of this, I will open up for general public comment for anyone who wants to talk
Right,
on
thank you.
any matter.
Mr. Chairman and members, Scott Wetchigan on the State Association of Electrical Workers, California Coalition of Utility Employees. I very much appreciate the registrar's clarifications. I have to, with all due respect, categorically disagree with the council's suggestion to the public members of this committee that somehow it's appropriate for the board to authorize this expenditure of a study without giving the scope. There's a difference between specs in an RFP and scope. In all good conscience, you should not be able to vote to spend money on a study if it's not very clear as to what the scope of that study is going to be. We see it across state government every day. Over 30 years of practicing state government, I've never seen a board or commission adopt a study without being specific to what the scope's going to be. That's not going through the Department of General Services spec process of putting together an RFP that meets all the requirements of the public contract code and the government code. That's a separate process. You most certainly need to understand what the scope is, and I think what Register Foat did was differentiate between spec and scope. And we would then continue to support the idea of a study being approved if, as described by the Register, the board was going to be given, the broad sort of scoping of what that study is going to entail. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Brad Hebner with CALSA. Having hired researchers a lot for research projects, I think we have a definitional issue here. Scope of work tends to be, it's a contractual thing. It often isn't done when you have selected the researcher. You go back and forth on the very detailed scope that's part of the contract for the work. That's not what we want to do at this level. I fully support what you seem to be indicating your intention is, to give a general guideline, to give an outline and direction as to what it is to be studied. But be careful not to call it the scope of work.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, Tom Enslow. I just want to reiterate what Scott Wedge says. I have never seen a scope of work approved by a board, a study approved by a board without the scope being set. I mean, this is just going to create what you guys just did for the last 2 years, is it's going to be back and forth. It's going to be an undefined scope of what someone's going to study. At this point, there's been 2 years of testimony. The board should be able to narrow down the questions that it has and then look to the expert to provide that information. And I'll say that, I mean, you already heard, contractors, you already heard the PHCC complain about the money being spent unwisely in this process. Nothing would be more unwise than to move forward with a study without a defined scope. At this point, you guys should have specific questions that can be answered, specific information that you're asking for, and a expert should be able to provide you that. To just have a wide open question, we're not going to be moving forward, and it would be a waste of money.
Thank you. Anyone else? Coming back to the board. There's a motion and a second. Yes,
Do we have to worry about how much it's going to cost?
absolutely.
So how do we know that?
We'll figure it out. When we get there. That's what staff, that's their next charge.
So we could take it out to bid and then come back?
I don't know. Staff has got to sit down.
I mean,
and they gotta
you got to
look-
have some kind of approval with the money.
David, can you answer
right?
the question?
Yes. What the plan would be, I'm just going to reiterate, we would come to the board on December 12th with the general areas we want to look at. And we've been studying this now for almost 2 years. So we really do have an understanding of what areas need to be looked at and where I think we can really help to bring some clarity. As far as the cost, we're fortunate to have Tanya Corcoran as the Chief Deputy Registrar here, and she has a lot of experience with these type of contracts and what the cost would be. What we haven't done yet, 'cause we're waiting for approval from the committee and from the board, is to determine what the average cost would be for a study such as this, for this type of work. And this isn't the first time it's been done. We can reach out to our partnering board and bureaus that have done similar, have hired similar consultants to find out what they've paid. And we'll be prepared to bring that back to the full board on December 12th to give you an idea as to what this will cost.
Anything else from the board? No? David? Anything?
We were talking about, well, some of the speakers were talking about scope. Isn't the scope the energy, the ESS?
David?
I mean, that's the scope, right? That's the
Registrar
study.
David, answer that, please.
Yeah, well, we've heard a lot today about what the larger issues are here. One is the economics of this. We've got difference of opinion, so certainly it would be helpful to take a look at that. We know we need to look at safety issues. This all relates to the battery energy storage system matter. I mean, that is the overall scope of what we'd be looking at. It's a general scope. But we also have heard that we should take a look at code requirements and size and complexity of these systems. It's nothing that we haven't been hearing about from the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the general areas that we need to have an independent party look at and then provide recommendations and bring those back to the board.
Anything else from the board? Felice, please take roll. Yeah, motion was made of Kevin and second of David.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
David De La Torre,
Aye.
Dave Diaz.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to open up public comment once again. If you guys want to get up and say whatever you want, I don't care if you want to say, wash my car.
Definitely can use the car wash on.
Mine
Point of order,
could, yeah, it
that's 3
hasn't
minutes,
rained in a
right?
while.
Eddie Bernacchi on behalf of National Electrical Contractors Association, one more time. I think that when this started in 2015, there has been quite a bit of confusion on what the board's current position is on when a C46 contractor is authorized to install these battery energy storage systems, when they may need an additional license, the C10 license or the A and B. I think it'd behoove the board and the industry in total if, and I know you've done this in the past, if an industry bulletin could be issued to agencies and contractors on the proper classification now, as the board has determined it for the last 15 years now to install these systems, so that everyone knows the playing field we're dealing with. This process has muddied the waters even more, And there is quite a bit of confusion out there in the industry on what license classification they need in what circumstances. So I would encourage the board to move forward on a bulletin.
Thank you for your thoughts. Does anybody else? Yes.
Mr. Chairman and members, Richard Markson, now on behalf of the Western Electrical Contractors Association. A couple of speakers brought up the question of electrician certification, something that WECA for a long time has supported, and it points out, we believe, that the current inconsistency in the electrician certification law that only applies to a C10 contractor. We believe that covered electrical work, irrespective of who the employer or contractor is, should be done by a certified electrician. If it's a swimming pool contractor and they're installing the energy for swimming pool motors and lighting, that should be done by a certified electrician. If it's a C46 that's doing energy storage system, that should be done by a certified electrician. That's a long-held belief. Unfortunately, we have been unsuccessful in expanding beyond the current requirement for C10, but ultimately we think that that would resolve a lot of the questions about safety, qualifications, and the preparation to do that kind
Thank you,
of
sir.
work.
I was pleased, I think if I heard Mr. Benike correctly, that the request for a bulletin go out to clarify that the C46 contractors under current regulation are allowed to do solar and storage concurrently today, as they have actually for 40 years. Glad to hear that recognition of that fact. We would support that being clarified. There is a lot of disruption and confusion in the industry and in the market right now. I also want to remind this board of the existing problem that has been in place and has been a thorn in our side since December of 2018, and that is around the issue of modifying an existing PV system with an energy storage device. We contend that that is something the C46 has always done, that this license board has always allowed, and to restrict the C46 contractors on those terms is already causing significant damage to the market. I get phone calls and emails from my member companies that are C46 whose phones are ringing off the hook right now from their previous solar consumers, their customers that they went and installed a solar system on their home. They'd like to add a battery in light of the fires and the PSPS events so they can keep the lights on when the blackouts happen. My contractors that are C46, and also I'll remind you A and B, are now not able to go and service their customers to add a battery, modifying their system with a battery. I'll remind you that there's a serious consumer protection issue that this triggers. In my contractors' contracts, they warranty their work unless another contractor comes in and touches the system that voids the warranty. So you're putting the consumer in a really tough spot. They either are voiding the warranty on their existing PV system and getting a battery, or they're foregoing the ability to have reliable self-generation power during the next blackout. This is causing serious problems right now in the interpretation of this decision by your enforcement officer here at the CSLB. The SGIP program, the rebate program administered by the 3 investor-owned utilities in the state of California, providing rebates for consumers to go solar and add a battery to their solar system, actually specifies that only a C10 can do a retrofit work per this agency's decision through one enforcement officer. That means that my Bs, my As, and my C46s are right now unable to do that work and receive a rebate on behalf of their customer. This is a huge problem. We've been wanting to sit down with the enforcement officer and with the staff of the CSLB and really discuss this issue and get to the bottom of it. We have the ability as a C46 to modify a PV system. The PV system has always been inclusive of energy storage for 40 years.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Here's your last opportunity. With that, that's closed. Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion is second to adjourn. Feliz, please.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese, David De La Torre, Dave Diaz.
Yep.
We're adjourned.